What's up, everybody? Welcome back. We are here with some more NFL DFS picks and lineup advice, this time for another short slate, the two-gamer on Saturday for Week 18, January 7th. Welcome, I'm Brian Jester, co-founder of Occupy Fantasy, joined by Jack, creator of DFS Magic, creator of the lineup builder at Occupy Fantasy. And Jack is checking all the boxes. He has hit us from his house, from work, from the car, and now he is at an airport tuning in. Jack, what's up, man? Appreciate you.
Hey, yeah, you too, man. Hope you had a nice holiday break. And you said it. Whenever there's a two gamer, wherever I am on the earth, we're gonna do one of these videos. And yeah, looking forward to it. Once again, no Josh Allen, but we have someone that looks almost like Josh Allen in Patrick Mahomes. But yeah, let's get into it.
Yeah, so pretty straightforward slate. So what we'll do here, we'll talk about the injuries that impact the slate, a couple lineup construction tips, some stacking ideas, and some lower owned players that we like. If you're not already, make sure you are subscribed to the channel. Get notified when we go live, upload these videos with the playoffs next week. Basically, the next month is full of short slates, so you'll want to tune into these videos. And between Jack and I, we have now 5 large field GPP wins. Jack accounting for 4 of those in short slates. So that's why you want to tune into these videos. Give us a thumbs up. We'd appreciate it. So Jack, the injuries, I'll go position by position really quickly. Trevor Lawrence has the Q tag. He is good. We have Jarrett Stidham starting once again for Derek Carr, and we have Josh Dobbs starting once again for Tennessee. I mean, the quarterbacks that are starting this weekend is outrageous, the number of bad quarterbacks that we have. But while we're on the quarterback position, how do you think the ownership shakes out for these 4 guys?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Usually, you see the best guys go super top heavy. We are seeing some of that. You'll see we have Mahomes, somewhere in the 40 to 50% range on both sides. However, Garrett Stidham, blew up the slate last week, or the game he was in, and we've seen, for those of you who don't know, we subscribe to and peruse around some of the other sites to see what people are projecting, and Stidham's projection is frighteningly high. And we think that we know people chase the box score, so we think we're going to see more Stidham than you might expect on a typical slate, because where he goes like 5% owned. So what do you think about that? Is that a fluky performance? Like, think it's worth chasing? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, it's tough because it's their last game of the year. We don't know how they're. Last week they played all the starters because technically they still had an outside chance at the playoffs. Will they do that again this week? Probably, because it is a divisional rival and they do have something to play for. So I don't know, man. I mean, last week was literally the ceiling performance, but he is cheap and he's got weapons, which is all you can ask for. The big question is can you play Dobbs at 5%? And we'll get into that here in a little bit as we talk about the stacks. As for, let's go back to DraftKings here, the running back position. No major injuries. However, Josh Jacobs has like 9 injuries listed on the injury reports, like hip, oblique, ankle, knee, shoulder, everything. And he's going to play. But the big question for me is, Jack, we actually saw him have his lowest snap share of the season last week. He was in and out of the game with that oblique injury, and he's about 150 yards in first place for the rushing title, which has been mentioned multiple times by both he and beat writers. So I don't think his ownership will see that big of a decrease, Jack. With Derrick Henry on the slate, obviously he's not going to go super high, but I think there's a chance that Jacobs doesn't play a full game here. Even White was mentioned in Beat Reporter's article, so I find it hard to see Jacobs playing a full-time role here.
Yeah, absolutely, and you're right. Sites are not going to reflect uh, this fact that you just stated, and that they bump his projection down a little bit, right? But at the end of the day, people are still going to see his name. And his price is, he's under Henry. He's still expensive. So yeah, people are going to play him more than, and it's just kind of a risk thing, right? It's like, what are the odds that he's gonna rush for 250 yards with all those injuries? Is he going to do it 40% of the time because the field thinks so? That's kind of how you view these things. The other, I'll just touch on it because you mentioned the cheap running backs. You'll see they have probably really low OF index and really low ownership, but we've seen it, I think, several times, Brian, on these short slates where cheap running backs that can score like 8-10 points become optimal when the really highly owned expensive guys bust.
Yes, and so that obviously could be someone like Pacheco at 5,600, but that also means guys like Haskins and Hasty and Abdullah, and especially if you're playing the angle that Jacobs doesn't play as much as intended, that means more snaps for Abdul. That means more snaps for Brandon Bolin, potentially more snaps for Zamir White. So you have to like those guys in that sense because literally this time last year, Jack, we saw Jerick McKinnon, who's in a different role now, but last year was 1% owned on a 2 or 3 game slate and won someone $1 million because all it takes is a couple points. He scored more than a couple points, but towards the end of the year, cheap guys can get to the optimal way quicker than some of these expensive guys.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, going on to wide receiver. Treylon Burks is officially questionable, limited in practice on Wednesday, did not practice Thursday. Mike Vrabel said he's probably good to go, but let's monitor that because that would change some cheap wide receiver options here. I think the interesting one, though, Jack, is the KC wide receiver rotation. Sky Moore has been ruled out, not playing a ton of snaps, but is playing snaps. Mecole Hardman activated from IR, but still questionable to play. Andy Reid said he knows he's going to push it. They're going to evaluate him tonight and tomorrow. But between those guys, that opens up some cheap, lower-owned receivers that can help us differentiate and save some salary.
Yep. Always have to find those, cheaper guys that have a bad projection, but they're playing 80% of snaps at wide receiver. Tony is someone that we think probably will go a little higher just because I think he did pretty well. Was it last week or 2 weeks ago?
Yep.
Hardman's an interesting one. You would think maybe they wouldn't risk it in not that it's a meaningless game, but like it's a game they probably think they should win. So yeah, that's just one to be around at lock and see what happens there.
I actually like Justin Watson too. When he's been on the field, he gets some deep balls, and he's only 3K. And if Sky Moore's out and Hardman doesn't come back, I really like Justin Watson as a lower owned guy. So, all right, tight ends. We actually have no injuries. Just note that Darren Waller, Foster Moreau are basically splitting snaps towards the end of the year here. Keep that in mind. Stay with Okonkwo and Austin Hooper. And that's really it as far as injuries go. Now, Jack, this is only a 2-gamer. The videos you and I have done recently have been of the 3-game and 4-game variety. And we were discussing this morning offline. Any major differences in your eyes, because you have 1 or 2 game slate before, any major differences in how we build lineups, number of low-owned players we need, compared to the 3 or 4 game slates?
Yeah, I think your lineups just look worse, and that means you're allowing more exceptions to the rules, right? So defenses against 1 or even 2, maybe even 3, depending on the case. Opponents, multiple running backs from the same team. 3 pass catchers from the same team. 3, sort of one-offs from a different game on the same team that normally you'd say I would never do, right? So those kinds of things, you're going to see more of that. I guess my biggest advice for this is when you find yourself looking at your lineups being like, is that too crazy, or should I just let the builder do that, or let my lineup do that? I would generally lean toward just let it do it, because in these games you can get some really weird lineups, especially Brian on DraftKings. I don't remember. I think we talked on the 3-gamer that we saw a 5 or 6 man win. What about a 2-gamer? Have we ever seen like a 7-man, or is it 6?
Yeah, we've seen 6-mans win before. We've seen it on larger slates, even 3 or 4 gamers. So yeah, I think you can build 6-mans, and I think even in smaller field, like who's to say that a 6-man Kansas City stack isn't the best way to go here? Jacksonville game is a lower total. Kansas City blows out Las Vegas. Now we get 6 guys who, again, you don't have to be perfect in small field. And I would still lean towards the side of overstacking in smaller field because there's less things you have to get right. Obviously, that translates from the main slate as well, from larger slates. So yeah, I think a lot of people have that question, Jack. We talk about the builder here, and we talk about lineups might look bad, but when you're hand building, it can be difficult to say, this is too crazy, or this doesn't look good enough. So I think when people hand build, it's a difficult proposition on smaller slates like this.
Yeah, absolutely. Bring up a good point with overstacking small field, and you got to think people in small field and you play this all the time, but I imagine they do it even less. They probably are more projections focused. Is that accurate?
100%, 100% right.
Yeah.
So I'm just building something here, right? Because you could do like Mahomes, McKinnon. You played Tony. You play Travis Kelce. You play Valdez Scantling, running back with I don't know who's going to be popular. Mac Hollins on the other side. 5K left per player. That's a 5-1 stack. Though in Kansas City defense even. That's the thing here too, Jack. We haven't really mentioned it in previous videos. But now, especially on the 2-game slate, including a defense within your stack or even playing the defense opposite your quarterback is in play and sometimes has correlation.
Yeah, honestly, like a pick six in two gamer is basically a pick six in Showdown, right? Which is like in Showdown, that's a really desirable outcome, and that's almost the
Right.
same thing here. You get a quick 8 points, and then your quarterback now is trailing. So it's going to look ugly, but you just got to kind of hold your nose and do it.
And a small fraction of the field is going to do that. So it's another way to get different. And again, it's not something you would ever do on a 10-game slate, but you can certainly do it on a 2-game slate. And even with the Raiders being the cheapest defense, it's not even that outrageous to consider that primarily in your Mahomes lineups. Mahomes plus Raiders defense, right?
Yeah, and you hit something I should have mentioned, and I'm glad you did. Uniqueness is a big difference between three gamer and two gamer. Three gamers, you kind of stick to that sub 20% player, and you're generally fine. You will see some very heavily duplicated lineups on two gamers. So you really get if you're trying to create unique lineups in large field, you just have to spend some extra time making sure either your construction is unique, like Brian just mentioned, quarterback versus defense, or salary, or using a pretty low owned player, or maybe multiple of the sub 20 variety. So it's just it's hard to get unique in the large field, the two gamers, but you can do it.
I would say, and if I miss anything, let me know, Jack. The ways to get different, and you can combine these together for 2-game slates are the number of 5% players you have, the number of players under 20% projected ownership, stacks that are more than 4 players on DraftKings, on FanDuel, stacks that bring back more than 2 guys, quarterback versus defense, and maybe that's it. Maybe you said like 3 pass catchers from one team or something like that, right?
Yeah, and then salary, which we'll get into this. This slate is a challenging one, but yet when you leave salary, you do become unique. But you just gotta be careful on this slate, and we'll get into why.
Well, we could talk about that now. Why is it something that we have to be more careful about here? Because
Oh,
naturally, I
yeah.
would just say like, oh, maybe I can leave $1,500 on a 2-game slate and be okay. But what do you think here?
Well, the problem is, for those that don't know, Brian and I project our ownership on all these short slates and spend quite a bit of time on it. And one thing we noticed here, particularly on DraftKings, was it was pretty easy to jam the studs.
Yep.
So what that tells you is, if you leave $2,000 on a lineup, the odds are higher that someone's going to have a similar lineup with a better player. Whereas FanDuel, by contrast, this time it was pretty tough. The pricing is real sharp on FanDuel. So I would say on this slate, from what I've seen now, DraftKings a little hard to leave salary, FanDuel a little bit more flexible. I think it just has to do with the gaps in price between the studs and the junk players. DraftKings kind of looks a little more bunched, like you got a bunch of guys in the 4 to 7K range, whereas FanDuel has some like $8,000-9,000 players, and then like a big gap down to that sort of like 5,500 range.
Yeah, that's a good point. So it's really difficult, and I guess just really quickly, speaking of the games and players, we don't expect any of these teams outside of maybe Vegas to rest any guys or have lower snap counts because Kansas City's playing for the 1 seed. Tennessee and Jacksonville are playing for the division and a playoff spot. So we expect full-time roles, which does make it difficult to leave salary because of that, because we're expecting full games from everyone that is playing. All right, Jack, 2 final topics here. We'll start with stacks. How many is too many? And we'll go team by team. Kansas City, Vegas, Tennessee, Jacksonville. Is there too many for any of these teams? Is there a minimum you would include for any of these teams to make sure you capture their upside and their ownership?
Yeah, I think Mahomes is the easy one, right? I think you stack a minimum of 3 players with him. Running back, wide receiver, tight end, just because he's so expensive that if he optimals, unless he has for him, a fairly rare, I mean, that would take a pretty big rushing performance from him. But more than likely, he's going to bring along, 3 players that will be competitive. And I don't know that there's an upper limit. I think you said six man, maybe 7 is too crazy. Maybe you don't want to play, a running back, 2 running backs, 3 receivers, and a tight end. But I think a 6-man stack with him is reasonable. Do you agree?
Totally agree. 100%. On the other side, I think you have to include a minimum of 3 guys for Stidham stacks too because of his ownership. And if he's going to get there and only 1 or 2 guys, like if it's just him and Adams, right, you're going to get duped to infinity. So I think if he's going to put up a good enough score to be optimal, he probably throws to at least 2 other guys, maybe 3. And they got some cheap options. So I think you have to play 3 with him too, at least.
Yeah, I agree. And let's just talk about this. I mean, 20% for a guy that, if he didn't have that game last week, he would be 5% owned, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
it would be Mahomes
so,
and
so
Lawrence 40% each, and it'd be Dobbs and Stidham 5% each, right?
yeah, yeah. Absolutely. And so I think you're right. He is overowned. If you play him and Adams together, you're gonna be up against a ton of people. And like you said earlier, there's so much more you have to get right if you do that, right? You have to hit on all those one-offs. Yeah, I'd say min 3 on him. 6 man, I would say is probably too crazy. You could probably throw a 5 man out there. They do have some very cheap secondary pass catchers like Rowe and I think Matt Collins is pretty cheap, right? And they have I think Renfro's really cheap. Renfro's like 3,800. Yeah. So I mean, you could do it. It's a little crazy, but if you were throwing 150 lineups in, I wouldn't block it. I would say that.
For sure. Now, Tennessee and Jacksonville, I think Lawrence, you probably have to play three guys too. He runs a little bit as well, but I think given his ownership and the weapons he has, you probably have to include three there as well. And I think he's maybe in the Mahomes boat that where you can play up to five, maybe even six, depending on how this game turns out.
Yeah, I mean, he's really turned it on, right, as a passer, just with his points and efficiency and everything. And Tennessee, from the last I checked, they struggle to stop the pass. So I think he torched them, right, when they played like a month ago. He had like 350. That was the Evan Ingram game, right?
Yes,
I think.
it was.
Yeah, and Evan Ingram's on slate. He's gonna be 50% owned. Similarly, right, if you just play like Lawrence and Ingram together, like it's gonna be you and 10,000 other people. So yeah, I agree. Min 3, I don't know. There's an upper limit for him either. Dobbs is the toughest one on the slate to talk about for this, right?
Yeah. So I don't think you have to min three Dobbs, right? You can min two, maybe min one, but I do think you can play three guys with him. Four is probably pushing it, just because of the state of their offense. But I think you can play three guys because if you play Dobbs, I think this might even be the preferred method. And you can include Henry in this group as well. Dobbs, Henry, you play Robert Woods, you play one of the tight ends, Okonkwo. 5,900 per player leaves you a lot that you can do with this lineup on DraftKings.
Yeah, I was just looking at the game logs last week to see how he did for the receivers. I don't think it was he. Yeah, so pretty limiting, right? Guys had like 4 or 5 catches for 70 yards. But again, let's talk about why you'd be doing this. You wouldn't be stacking 3 players with Dobbs because you think he's going to score 50 points, right? You'd be doing this in the situation that all the quarterbacks fail, which we've seen that a lot, Brian, right? On these slates, we're just kind of like we saw it on
Like the last slate, right? The last short slate we had
slate.
it happen. Yeah.
So all the quarterbacks failed. You had Baker Mayfield. You had basically a bunch of quarterbacks within 5 points of each other. That's how this wins. It's a unique lineup that you can jam a bunch of studs in, and you have to get a little lucky, right? You have to kind of get lucky that some of those one-offs are going to hit, but it's a way to win with a unique lineup in the situation that like all the quarterbacks bust.
Yeah, I mean, you're gonna have to get lucky anyways on a short slate. You're gonna have to get lucky, period, to
Yeah.
win a GPP, right? Would you rather get? And I think it's pretty similar outcomes. You have to get lucky that 6 Kansas City Chiefs are optimal. You have to get lucky that Stidham doesn't only pass to Adams and gets multiple touchdowns. You have to get lucky that if you only stack a receiver with your quarterback, you have to get lucky and get the other spots right. This is the same vein. You have to get lucky that quarterbacks score relatively similarly or Dobbs overperforms, and I don't think it's that crazy compared to the other options on the slate. So
And this means something because I love to just like jam one quarterback or two. Like I'm going to play all the quarterbacks on the slate. I think you have to.
yep.
They all can win. There's a very reasonable case that all of them can win. So and I think we've mentioned this before, but another way when you think about uniqueness and you're stacking 3 players, generally want to shoot for like one low owned guy, right? So like Kansas City's an easy example. Like you play Kelsey, he's chalk. You play a running back, he's chalk. That last one, you generally want to try to air for like a lower owned receiver. It doesn't have to be like a 2% owned player, but you probably don't want it to be like 46% owned Schuster.
Right.
You probably want it to be, like you said, Justin Watson or maybe Tony, right?
Yep.
Or if you do play 3 chalky Kansas City guys, you add a 4th one, and then that's the lower owned one. That's a great way to look at it.
Yeah, I think that's a great. Yeah, including the lower owned piece in your stack is a really great way to do it. And you playing all the quarterbacks is pretty eye opening. And I think Mayfield being optimal on Christmas changed everybody. So
You got to adapt. And that last point about low owned in the stack. I think when you're using the lineup builder, you're going to get a mix, right? But I think really when you're hand building, you're trying to figure out like, okay, I need to use one low owned guy. Who do I pick? A good guide is to start with the quarterback you're stacking. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's the easiest way, and especially in small field. Like that's a really good way to do it. So, so speaking of low owned guys, let's go team by team. Your favorite low owned guy from each team. Kansas City, mine's Justin Watson. Maybe Hardman. Anybody else?
Let me see here.
I'm just
Probably took him.
I named all the guys, so there's not much left for you.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's gotta be Watson. Tony, I'm a little worried he goes kind of chalky just because he's done well and
Yep.
people like the name. But yeah, I think you got it.
Vegas, they have some options. So who do you like for Vegas?
I,
That's
I
low.
wait. Well, I will amend on FanDuel. McKinnon is quite a bit more expensive than Pacheco.
Yep.
I don't think McKinnon's gonna go 5% under anything, but like he might go, 20% instead of 50. So that's a good way to diversify on
Which is
FanDuel.
crazy
Sorry,
because
go ahead.
he's basically LaDainian Tomlinson now. So it's kind of crazy.
Yeah. Team we
Uh,
on now?
Vegas, and they have some options: receiver,
Vegas.
tight end, running back. I think.
Well, I mean, I'm gonna go with the junk running backs, man. Abdullah, I think he's more of the pass catcher, right?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm gonna go Abdullah. I mean, they're trailing. Jacobs is hurt. Like $3,200 on DraftKings. I'm sure he's almost minimum price. Hope I didn't steal yours, but I think that's a no-brainer one for me.
No, I agree. Him, I like Foster Moreau too in this light. But Zamir White, if he's active, I think he will be. He's their rookie running back that they probably want to see some more of if they're going to let Josh Jacobs walk at the end of the season. So I think Zamir White's probably the guy here that we want to look at. But I like Abdullah too. So I think
Okay,
that's a situation that we really want to target. I think, and they're all 1%,
let's take a
1 to 2%.
brief pause. If you look at the pricing, tight end is the one spot on DraftKings where pricing is kind of insane, right? Kelsey's 8K and he's
Yeah.
gonna be 50% out. If he fails, I think that substantially opens up the slate and potentially lineups that leave salary could win, right? Because like you could play the optimal lineup and just play Darren Waller or Okonkwo or Moreau or whatever, right? And you could leave like $5,000 on the table, and as long as your players and Moreau outscore Kelsey and whatever worst player they have, you could still win. So um, one way to keep in mind that you could get chaos here is Kelsey failing.
I would, yeah. So maybe that's a rule. Maybe it's in your head or in the builder somehow, where it's like if Kelsey's not in the lineup, but Ingram is, for example, right? Because I think Ingram's probably the guy who could outscore Kelsey by himself. Maybe Waller, but definitely Ingram. Then you're
Yes.
allowed to leave 3K, 3,500, whatever it is, right?
Yeah. Yep. I agree with that. That's a good rule.
Cool. And then
There's
Tennessee and
special salary rules for that too, which
yes,
is nice.
that's what I was thinking of short. Special salary rules allows you when this player is in a lineup, your salary range can be X through Y, which is I don't know if any other builder has that. Ours does. So be sure to use that. It's exceptionally helpful on Showdown and smaller slates. Tennessee and Jacksonville, Jack. This whole game, anybody that's lower owned that you like.
Why don't you go first because I'm pulling it up.
It's pretty gross. I will say
It's gross.
Tennessee receivers like Westbrook, Akina, maybe Woods. If Burks is out, it opens it up even more. Jacksonville, I think you probably maybe like Jermichael Hasty at 4,600 as a running back who can get some work, has gotten some work, and he's explosive. He's busted some long runs not only this year but in his career as well. And it doesn't take much for a $4,600 running back to be optimal on a 2-game slate.
All right. Etienne wasn't hurt last week, was he?
No, they kind of pulled starters early as they had
That's
the
what it
game
was.
didn't matter as much. So
His last 4 games, his floor snap count is 25%.
for Hasty.
So yeah, Hasty, that's a great one. And
Yep.
if they get up early, right, he could easily play half the snaps. I guess I'll throw Marvin Jones out there just because 6% sticks out to me for starting wide receiver. That I think his depth to target is pretty high, right? I think
Yep.
he's a downfield guy.
Yep, for sure.
So that's an easy one to me. Catch a 50-yard touchdown, just immediately optimal. Eliminate 95% of the field.
I like that.
Tennessee.
Yeah, it's not good.
Dobbs.
Dobbs,
is it.
yeah, Dobbs.
Play Dobbs.
Yeah,
Seriously.
5%. That makes it easy. Okay.
Never been able to use quarterback for that, but we can today.
I know, yeah, it's rare to get a 5%er on a 2-gamer, but we'll take it. Shit.
Last one. We always do this. Over 40% owned. Who's the player you are most comfortable being significantly under the field on? I'm not gonna let you pick 38% Jacobs because that's too easy.
God damn it. Okay, well that's what I was gonna pick. All right. So on DraftKings over 40% at running back, we just have Etienne and Henry, which I feel okay playing both of those guys normally. That's probably going to come at receiver and maybe tight end. So let me see here. I'm just pulling up in the model here. I mean, probably Juju, 46. It's not like Juju's. I mean, has he ever had a good game? Let's be honest, right? Like he hasn't
I,
done that well this year. So I think Juju at 46 is probably the easy answer.
I
Like he can
agree.
easily put up four
I
points.
agree. He doesn't have a high ceiling, right? He's a low A dot guy. I think Zay Jones is the other one that and it goes along with my pick of Marvin Jones. Like, if Zay Jones is 40% owned and Marvin Jones is 5% owned, like Zay Jones, 9 times more likely to outscore Marvin Jones, like no
When
chance.
he's 40% owned by the field, he actually is. That's the
Yeah,
key.
yeah. When he's 40% owned, he's a lock. So actually, go find prop bets, take all the overs on Zay
Yeah.
Jones. He's gonna score 2 touchdowns, but um, yeah.
All right, man. I know you're in the airport. You got places to be, so I'll let you get out of here. Any final thoughts for this two gamer before we head into the playoffs?
Just as always, be around for the late swap tomorrow
Mm.
night. Check your lineups. Look for PMRs ahead of you. Determine if you should be playing the chalk or making pivots. If you're playing, large field multiple lamps or small field, right? You probably still have to do that too.
Definitely.
But
Just
always want to recommend that. We don't get many chances to do that in NFL with the late swaps, but we do here.
yeah, over the next month or so, we're going to be doing it heavily, and just pray that the first game doesn't go into overtime and mess up your late swap window. So, all right. So for Jack, you can find him on Twitter at DFS_Magic_ owner of DFS Magic, creator of the lineup builder at Occupy Fantasy. You can follow me at Brian Jester FF. If you made it this far, you like what you've seen, make sure you are subscribed to the channel. All kinds of sports videos are being posted every single day. You'll get notified when they go live or upload it. Give us a thumbs up, helps us out, helps others find the video. Any questions, comment on the video. I'll monitor this throughout the evening and all day Saturday, or join our Discord server, occupyfantasy.com/Discord. Chat with us, other members of the community. So for Jack, I'm Brian. DFS Magic, Occupy Fantasy. Thanks for listening, and good luck on this two-game slate.